Long before Attila the Hun became a name whispered with fear across the Roman Empire, his people, the Huns, were carving out a reputation as one of the most formidable nomadic tribes in Eurasian history. The story of the Huns is not merely one of conquest and bloodshed, but also a tale of adaptation, resilience, and the extraordinary transformation of a wandering people into a military juggernaut capable of challenging the mightiest civilizations of their time. The origins of the Huns are shrouded in mystery, partly because they left no written records of their own. Historians have pieced together their early history from Roman, Byzantine, and other contemporary sources, which often depicted the Huns as fierce, almost mythical horsemen from the vast steppes of Central Asia. Scholars generally agree that the Huns emerged somewhere near modern-day Mongolia or the border regions of Kazakhstan and southern Siberia. In these harsh environments, life was demanding and survival required mobility, resilience, and an intimate mastery of horsemanship. These qualities would later define the Hunnic way of life and make them a terror to sedentary civilizations to the west. By the 4th century CE, the Huns began to move westward, pushed by both environmental pressures and the migrations of other nomadic groups. Their expansion brought them into contact with the borders of the Roman Empire, and the reaction of Roman observers was a mixture of awe, fear, and bewilderment. Unlike many other tribes, the Huns did not settle in cities or build permanent fortifications. They were mobile warriors who could strike quickly and vanish into the open steppe before enemies could mount an effective counterattack. This mobility gave them a strategic advantage that traditional armies, tied to slower, heavier formations, struggled to counter. The Huns' societal structure was as fluid as their movements. Tribal alliances shifted frequently, and leadership depended largely on strength, charisma, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Early Hunnic leaders established themselves by uniting smaller tribes under a single banner, forging a cohesive force capable of both raiding and larger-scale military campaigns. Their social organization emphasized skill in battle and loyalty to the chieftain rather than inherited status or wealth. This meritocratic approach meant that capable warriors could rise through the ranks and contribute to the expansion of Hunnic power. One of the key aspects of Hunnic success was their unparalleled mastery of mounted warfare. The Huns were expert horsemen from childhood, capable of controlling horses with remarkable precision while shooting arrows with deadly accuracy. Unlike the infantry-heavy armies of Rome, which relied on formation and discipline, the Huns employed speed, unpredictability, and shock tactics. They could encircle enemy forces, harass them from a distance, and retreat before suffering substantial losses. This combination of mobility and psychological warfare made them seem almost supernatural to their opponents, who struggled to anticipate the Huns' next move. In addition to their military capabilities, the Huns were adept at exploiting the weaknesses of neighboring civilizations. They often used intimidation and diplomacy in tandem, offering alliances or threatening destruction, depending on what suited their strategic goals. Roman sources repeatedly described the Huns' cunning and ruthlessness, noting that entire cities would surrender without a fight at the mere sight of Hunnic forces on the horizon. This reputation was not merely the product of fear. The Huns had a genuine capacity for swift, decisive, and brutal action. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Huns had become a major force in Eastern Europe. They had pushed other tribes, such as the Goths and Alans, into Roman territories, inadvertently setting off a chain of migrations and conflicts that would destabilize the region. The Huns themselves remained outside the boundaries of the empire, but their influence was felt everywhere. Tribes fleeing from Hunnic raids sought refuge within Roman lands, while the Romans themselves negotiated treaties and paid tribute to keep the Huns at bay. This period marked the transformation of the Huns from a relatively obscure nomadic group into a power that could shape the political and military landscape of Europe. The rise of the Huns also had profound cultural implications. While much of what we know comes from Roman and Byzantine accounts that portray them as barbaric, Archaeological evidence shows that the Huns had a rich material culture, including sophisticated weaponry, intricate horse gear, and jewelry that reflected their status and identity. They were not merely mindless marauders, they were skilled artisans, traders, and strategists who understood the value of both intimidation and diplomacy. As the Huns continued to consolidate their power, the stage was set for the emergence of Attila, who would transform the Huns from a powerful tribal confederation into a nearly unstoppable force. The groundwork laid by previous leaders, unifying tribes, mastering mounted warfare, and exploiting the weaknesses of sedentary civilizations, provided Attila with the tools he needed to leave a permanent mark on history. Under his leadership, the Huns would go from being feared raiders to the scourge of the Roman world, reshaping the destiny of Europe in ways that would be felt for centuries. In retrospect, the rise of the Huns is a testament to the extraordinary adaptability of human societies. From the unforgiving steppes of Central Asia to the gates of Rome, the Huns exemplified how mobility, skill, and psychological warfare could enable a relatively small group to challenge the greatest empire of their age. Their story is not only one of conquest, but also of innovation and resilience, providing a fascinating prelude to the reign of Attila, whose name would become synonymous with terror and power. In sum, the rise of the Huns was the product of their environment, culture, and military genius. Their ability to unite disparate tribes, master the art of mounted warfare, and exploit the weaknesses of their enemies allowed them to become one of the most feared peoples of the ancient world. By the time Attila assumed leadership, the Huns were already a force to be reckoned with, primed to leave a legacy that would echo through history as one of the most formidable nomadic empires ever to challenge Rome. Attila, the Hun, often remembered as the Scourge of God, was not born with a throne waiting for him, nor was he predestined to terrorize the Roman Empire. His rise to power was shaped by a combination of family dynamics, political maneuvering, and the brutal realities of Hunnic society. Understanding Attila's early life provides crucial insight into how a young man from the Eurasian steppes transformed into one of the most feared leaders of the ancient world. Attila was born around 406 CE during a period of great upheaval in Europe. The Huns were already emerging as a dominant force, pushing westward and displacing other tribes such as the Goths and Alans. The Hunnic world was harsh and unforgiving, where strength, cunning, and leadership were prerequisites for survival. It was in this environment that Attila would be molded, a place where the weak were quickly eliminated and the strong could rise to extraordinary heights. Historical sources suggest that Attila and his brother Bleda were the sons of Munzuk, a minor Hunnic chieftain or noble. Munzuk was not the supreme ruler of the Huns, but he was well connected within the tribal hierarchy, providing his sons with the opportunity to ascend the ranks of Hunnic leadership. From an early age, Attila would have been immersed in the martial culture of the Huns. Boys were trained in horsemanship, archery, and hand-to-hand combat, learning to survive in the harsh steppe environment. Unlike sedentary societies, where formal education often took precedence, the Huns emphasized practical skills essential for warfare. Attila's upbringing likely involved extensive exposure to the tribal councils, observing how decisions were made, how allegiances were negotiated, and how power was asserted. These formative experiences shaped his understanding of both military strategy and political acumen. The death of Attila's father, Munzuk, created a pathway for him and his older brother Bleda to enter the Hunnic leadership. At that time, the Huns were not a centralized kingdom, but rather a confederation of tribes under the leadership of a dual kingship system. Following the death of their uncle, Rugila, or Rua, who had been the paramount leader of the Huns, Attila and Bleda were elected co-rulers around 434 CE. This dual leadership was not merely ceremonial, it required the brothers to balance authority, manage competing factions, and enforce Hunnic law while continuing their relentless campaigns against the Roman Empire. Attila's early years as co-ruler were marked by both consolidation and expansion. The Huns had already made a name for themselves as raiders and warriors, but under Attila and Bleda they sought to convert their reputation for terror into tangible political and economic gains. The brothers engaged in a combination of military raids, diplomatic negotiations, and strategic intimidation, particularly targeting the Eastern Roman Empire. One of their first major achievements was the negotiation of a treaty with the Romans in 435 CE, which required the empire to pay tribute to the Huns. This treaty was a significant demonstration of Attila's emerging leadership. He recognized the value of diplomacy and strategic leverage, showing that conquest was not solely about brute force, but also about negotiation and reputation. Despite the apparent partnership with his brother, Attila's ambitions extended beyond co-rulership. By 445 CE, Bleda had died under mysterious circumstances, with some historical sources suggesting that Attila may have orchestrated his brother's death to consolidate power. Whether through fratricide or natural causes, the result was the same. Attila became the sole ruler of the Huns. This transition marked a turning point in Hunnic history. Attila now had the freedom to implement his vision of leadership, expansion, consolidation, and an unrelenting campaign against Rome and other neighboring powers. As sole leader, Attila demonstrated remarkable political and military skill. He maintained the loyalty of the various Hunnic tribes, balancing rewards and punishments to ensure obedience. Leadership among the Huns required more than just strength. It demanded charisma, intelligence, and the ability to inspire fear and respect simultaneously. Attila excelled in all these areas, cultivating an image of invincibility that would soon terrify both Eastern and Western Rome. His ability to command loyalty was also rooted in his personal courage and strategic acumen. Historical accounts frequently describe him leading his troops from the front in battle, demonstrating both bravery and tactical ingenuity. Attila's ascension also coincided with a period of instability in the Roman world. The Western Roman Empire was grappling with internal corruption, economic decline, and the constant pressure of migrating tribes. The Eastern Roman Empire, while relatively stronger, was also vulnerable to the kind of rapid, mobile attacks the Huns excelled at. Attila recognized that the Romans were not invincible. Their legions, though disciplined, were often slow and cumbersome compared to the lightning-fast maneuvers of Hunnic cavalry. He exploited these weaknesses ruthlessly, blending traditional Hunnic raiding techniques with a sophisticated understanding of Roman politics and military limitations. By the late 44 Attila had firmly established himself as a ruler whose ambitions extended beyond the steppes. He began directing his forces toward large-scale invasions of Roman territories, first targeting the Eastern Roman Empire and then later the Western Empire. His leadership was characterized by a combination of strategic brilliance and psychological warfare. Cities and regions that resisted were often subjected to extreme brutality, while those that submitted were spared but had to pay tribute, reinforcing Attila's growing reputation as both a terror and a pragmatist. In addition to his military and political talents, Attila was also a master of reputation management. Roman and Byzantine chroniclers frequently emphasized his cruelty and the near-mythical ferocity of the Huns, ensuring that fear preceded him wherever he went. Attila understood the power of fear as a tool of control, using it to extract concessions and weaken resistance without necessarily committing to prolonged sieges or battles. This strategic use of psychological warfare would become a hallmark of his campaigns, distinguishing him from other contemporary leaders who relied primarily on brute force. Attila's early life and rise to power illustrate a combination of innate talent, rigorous upbringing, and opportunistic ambition. From his formative years on the steppe to his ascension as sole ruler, he demonstrated the qualities necessary to unite the Huns, challenge one of the greatest empires in history, and leave a legacy that would endure for centuries. By the time he emerged as the supreme leader of the Huns, Attila was not merely a conqueror but a shrewd strategist, a charismatic commander, and a figure whose very name would come to symbolize terror across Europe. In essence, the story of Attila's early life is a study in the making of a legend. His upbringing instilled the skills, resilience, and ambition necessary for leadership. His early political maneuvers demonstrated tactical intelligence, while his eventual consolidation of power showcased both cunning and decisiveness. These experiences laid the foundation for a reign that would challenge the might of Rome and transform the Huns from a fearsome nomadic confederation into one of history's most formidable military power zone. Of the key reasons Attila the Hun became one of the most feared figures in history lies not only in his personal leadership, but in the unparalleled military machine he commanded. The Huns were not merely a collection of raiders, they were a highly organized, highly mobile, and extraordinarily effective fighting force that relied on a combination of superior horsemanship, innovative tactics, psychological warfare, and strategic ruthlessness. Understanding the Hunnic military machine is crucial to comprehending how a relatively small nomadic group could repeatedly outmaneuver and defeat some of the most powerful empires of the ancient world, including Rome. At the core of Hunnic military strength was their mastery of cavalry warfare. The Huns were exceptional horsemen, trained from childhood to ride at high speeds, perform acrobatic maneuvers, and fight simultaneously while mounted. Every boy in Hunnic society learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, developing an instinctive rapport with horses that allowed for extraordinary mobility. Unlike many settled civilizations which relied on infantry-heavy armies, the Huns were almost entirely mounted. This gave them a dramatic advantage in speed, maneuverability, and endurance. They could traverse vast distances in a matter of days, often arriving unexpectedly and striking before their enemies had a chance to organize a defense. The Huns' horsemanship was complemented by their innovative weaponry, particularly their use of composite bows. Unlike the traditional bows of Roman infantry, Hunnic composite bows were small, lightweight, and extremely powerful, capable of shooting arrows with lethal force over long distances. What made the Huns especially dangerous was their ability to shoot accurately while riding at full gallop, even at angles that conventional armies could not anticipate. This meant that Hunnic cavalry could harass enemy formations, inflict damage, and retreat without suffering significant losses. A tactic later known as hit-and-run warfare, they were masters of what modern military strategists might call maneuver warfare, using speed and flexibility to offset numerical inferiority. The Hunnic military machine was also highly organized, despite the seeming chaos of nomadic life. Hunnic armies were divided into units, often based on tribal or clan structures, each led by a trusted subordinate of Attila. This hierarchical organization allowed the Huns to execute complex battlefield maneuvers, coordinate multiple attacks, and maintain cohesion even during rapid fluid engagements. Communication on the battlefield relied on visual and auditory signals, such as banners, horns, and shouted commands, enabling different units to act in concert despite the fast-moving nature of combat. The combination of individual skill and disciplined unit coordination made the Huns formidable opponents for more rigidly structured armies. Attila's strategic brilliance amplified the effectiveness of this military machine. He was not merely a warrior, but a general with a profound understanding of psychology and strategy. One of his most effective tactics was to exploit the fear of his enemies. Roman chroniclers frequently describe entire cities surrendering at the mere sight of Hunnic forces, demonstrating that Attila understood the value of reputation and terror. By cultivating an image of invincibility, he could achieve objectives without always resorting to prolonged sieges or bloody battles. This use of psychological warfare complemented his army's physical capabilities, multiplying their effectiveness in campaigns across the Roman Empire. In addition to psychological tactics, the Huns employed sophisticated battlefield maneuvers. They frequently used encirclement, feigned retreats, and ambushes to disorient and crush their opponents. A feigned retreat, for example, involved a portion of the Hunnic cavalry pretending to flee, drawing enemy forces into pursuit. Once the enemy had overextended themselves, hidden Hunnic units would flank or surround them, often resulting in catastrophic losses. Such tactics relied on speed, timing, and discipline, demonstrating that the Huns were not merely savages but calculated and adaptive strategists. Attila himself often led these maneuvers, inspiring loyalty and courage among his troops while ensuring precise execution. The Huns were also experts at logistical flexibility, another factor that contributed to their military dominance. Unlike settled armies that relied on supply lines, the Huns were largely self-sufficient. They lived off the land, using their herds for food and horses for transport, which allowed them to maintain mobility even in enemy territory. This capability enabled them to strike deep into Roman lands, creating chaos far from their own borders. Roman generals, accustomed to slower campaigns dictated by supply lines, found it difficult to respond effectively to such unpredictable and rapid incursions. Another hallmark of Hunnic warfare was their brutal efficiency. While the Huns were capable of diplomacy and extracting tribute, they were also capable of extreme violence when faced with resistance. Cities that resisted Hunnic demands were often subjected to massacres, destruction, and looting, reinforcing the Huns' reputation as an unstoppable force. This ruthlessness was not mere cruelty for its own sake. It was a calculated tactic to encourage compliance, demoralize populations, and consolidate power. Attila understood that fear could be as powerful a weapon as the bow and sword. The Hunnic military machine also adapted and incorporated elements from conquered peoples and enemies. As the Huns expanded westward, they absorbed knowledge of Roman fortifications, siege tactics, and even auxiliary troops from subjugated tribes. This adaptability made them even more dangerous, as they could turn their enemies' strengths against them. Unlike some nomadic groups who remained isolated, the Huns were pragmatic learners willing to modify their approach to maximize effectiveness on the battlefield. This combination of innovation, adaptability, and raw martial skill set the Huns apart from other contemporary powers. The impact of the Hunnic military machine extended far beyond the battlefield. Their raids and invasions caused widespread displacement of other tribes, triggering a domino effect that ultimately contributed to the destabilization of the Roman Empire. Gothic, Vandal, and other migratory tribes were forced into Roman territories, creating social, economic, and military pressures that weakened the empire's ability to respond to external threats. In this sense, the Huns were not only conquerors, but catalysts for larger historical shifts, shaping the geopolitical landscape of Europe for decades. In summary, the Hunnic military machine under Attila was a unique fusion of mobility, skill, strategy, and psychological warfare. Their mastery of cavalry combat, innovative use of composite bows, disciplined unit organization, and ability to instill fear made them a formidable adversary for even the most disciplined armies. Attila's leadership amplified these qualities, transforming the Huns from a nomadic confederation into a cohesive and terrifying force capable of challenging the greatest empire of their age. Through a combination of ingenuity, brutality, and strategic acumen, the Huns reshaped the art of warfare in the 5th century, leaving a legacy that would echo through the annals of history for centuries. The military machine of the Huns was not simply a tool of destruction, it was a testament to the adaptability, skill, and intelligence of a people who had mastered the art of survival on the open steppe. It was this combination of mobility, terror, and tactical brilliance that allowed Attila to strike fear into the heart of Rome and solidify his place as one of history's most legendary warriors. The effectiveness of the Hunnic army ensured that Attila's campaigns would be remembered not just for their devastation, but for their demonstration of the power of a disciplined, innovative, and fearsome military force. Attila, the Huns' name is forever entwined with the decline of the Western Roman Empire. While he did not single-handedly topple Rome, his relentless campaigns, strategic ingenuity, and reputation for terror exposed the weaknesses of the empire and hastened its eventual collapse. The story of Attila's impact on the Western Roman Empire is not just one of battles and invasions. It is a tale of political manipulation, psychological warfare, and the vulnerabilities of a once mighty civilization struggling to defend itself against a new and formidable enemy. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former glory. Political corruption, economic instability, overextended borders, and internal power struggles had weakened its ability to respond effectively to external threats. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, maintained relative stability, but even it had been forced to acknowledge the growing threat posed by the Huns. Attila, understanding both the military and political landscape of his time, capitalized on the empire's fragility with remarkable precision. Attila's campaigns against the Romans began in earnest during his co-rule with his brother Bleda, who died under suspicious circumstances around 445 CE. With Attila as the sole ruler, the Huns shifted from periodic raids to large-scale invasions aimed at exacting tribute, weakening Roman authority, and demonstrating the supremacy of Hunnic power. One of their first major campaigns targeted the Eastern Roman Empire, particularly in the Balkans, where Hunnic armies ravaged cities, pillaged villages, and extracted massive tributes. Contemporary sources describe entire regions being depopulated as Roman settlements were burned, looted, or abandoned in fear of the Huns' swift and merciless attacks. Attila's invasions were notable not only for their physical devastation, but also for their psychological impact. The Huns' reputation for cruelty preceded them, and cities often surrendered without resistance, hoping to avoid slaughter. Roman chroniclers, such as Priscus, describe Hunnic armies advancing with terrifying efficiency, leaving trails of destruction that instilled widespread panic. This fear became a weapon in itself by SPR. Eating terror, Attila minimized the need for prolonged engagements and maximized the impact of each campaign. Even the most fortified cities often chose to pay tribute rather than risk annihilation, further strengthening Hunnic influence over Roman territories. The treaties that Attila forced upon the Romans were both humiliating and financially draining. The Eastern Roman Empire agreed to pay enormous sums of gold in annual tribute to keep the Huns at bay. In addition to money, the Romans were compelled to provide supplies, hostages, and sometimes political concessions. These agreements were not merely pragmatic, they were symbolic demonstrations of Hunnic dominance. Through a combination of brute force and negotiation, Attila established himself as a figure whose demands could not be ignored, reinforcing the image of the Huns as the ultimate arbiters of power in the region. While the Eastern Roman Empire struggled to cope, Attila also turned his attention to the Western Roman Empire. In 451 CE, he launched one of his most famous campaigns, invading Gaul, modern-day France. The campaign culminated in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, also known as the Battle of Chalons, where Attila faced a coalition of Roman forces led by General Flavius Aetius and allied Visigothic troops. This battle is widely regarded as one of the most significant clashes of late antiquity, not because it decisively defeated Attila, he survived and retreated, but because it temporarily halted his advance into Western Europe. The battle showcased the effectiveness of Roman military strategy when combined with allied forces, yet it also underscored the persistent threat posed by the Huns, whose mobility and terror tactics continued to destabilize the region. Attila's campaign in Italy in 452 CE further demonstrated his ability to exploit the empire's vulnerabilities. Marching into the Po Val, the Huns sacked cities, plundered the countryside, and brought northern Italy to its knees. Rome itself, though not directly attacked, was thrown into panic. According to historical accounts, Pope Leo I led a delegation to meet Attila in an effort to negotiate the city's safety. While the exact reasons for Attila's withdrawal from Rome are debated, some attribute it to disease, logistical challenges, or divine intervention. The episode cemented his fearsome reputation. It became clear that even the heart of the Western Roman Empire was not immune to Hunnic pressure. The impact of Attila's campaigns extended beyond immediate destruction. The constant threat of Hunnic invasion caused mass migrations of tribes, such as the Visigoths and Vandals, into Roman territories. These migrations placed additional strain on the empire, exacerbating economic difficulties, weakening military defenses, and contributing to social instability. In this sense, Attila's actions indirectly accelerated the decline of Western Rome by destabilizing the already fragile balance between Romans and barbarian populations within its borders. Attila's strategic genius lay not only in his ability to fight, but also in his understanding of the broader political landscape. He was a master of diplomacy, using a combination of alliances, intimidation, and negotiation to extract maximum advantage. He forged alliances with certain tribes, manipulated rival factions, and even played the Eastern and Western Roman empires against each other when it suited him. By combining military prowess with political acumen, Attila ensured that his influence extended far beyond the battlefield, shaping the course of European history for decades. Despite the eventual withdrawal from Italy and temporary setbacks, such as the battle in Gaul, Attila's campaigns left an indelible mark on the Western Roman Empire. He demonstrated the empire's inability to defend its borders effectively against a highly mobile, disciplined, and ruthless opponent. The fear he inspired weakened the resolve of Roman officials and citizens alike, making it clear that the empire's days of unchallenged supremacy were numbered. Within a few decades of Attila's death in 453 CE, the Western Roman Empire would collapse entirely, fragmented by internal decay and external pressures, a process to which Attila had undeniably contributed. In conclusion, Attila's relationship with the Western Roman Empire was one of both direct confrontation and indirect influence. Through his campaigns, he exposed the empire's vulnerabilities, extracted tribute, instilled fear, and triggered migrations that further destabilized Roman territories. His combination of military innovation, psychological warfare, and strategic diplomacy allowed a nomadic confederation to challenge the greatest power of its time. While he did not directly cause the fall of Rome, Attila's actions accelerated the decline of the Western Roman Empire, reshaping the political, military, and social landscape of Europe. Attila was more than a conqueror. He was a catalyst for change, a force that revealed the fragility of a civilization that had once seemed invincible. The legacy of Attila's campaigns against Rome endured long after his death. The Huns left behind a trail of fear, disruption, and structural weakening that future invaders could exploit. Rome, already struggling with internal and external pressures, could no longer project the power and stability it once had. In this way, Attila the Hun remains a central figure in the story of the Western Roman Empire's decline, a leader whose vision, tactics, and ruthlessness brought one of history's greatest empires closer to its knees than perhaps any other single individual. Attila the Hun, who once instilled terror across Europe and brought the Roman Empire to the brink of collapse, left behind a legacy that transcends the temporal boundaries of his reign. His name has become synonymous with fear, brutality, and relentless conquest, yet his influence extends far beyond the battlefield. The story of Attila's legacy encompasses not only the historical and political consequences of his campaigns, but also the myths, legends, and cultural perceptions that have shaped his image for centuries. The immediate legacy of Attila's reign was evident in the destabilization of the Roman Empire. His campaigns against both the Eastern and Western empires exposed vulnerabilities in military organization, political cohesion, and economic resilience. Cities were destroyed, populations displaced, and tributary systems imposed, leaving lasting scars on the regions he invaded. The invasions forced the Romans to confront the limitations of their traditional military structures, ultimately accelerating reforms and adaptations within the empire. Even though the Huns themselves did not establish permanent settlements within Roman territory, the effects of their invasions reverberated for decades, contributing indirectly to the eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE. Attila's ability to catalyze such profound consequences highlights the far-reaching impact a single strategic and ruthless leader can have on the course of history. Beyond the political and military consequences, Attila's legacy is perhaps most enduring in the realm of myth and popular imagination. Contemporary Roman and Byzantine historians painted him as the embodiment of barbarian ferocity, a living scourge sent by the gods to punish a decadent empire. Sources such as Priscus, Jordanes, and later chroniclers described him in almost supernatural terms, a leader whose very presence could induce panic, whose armies struck lightning speed, and whose cruelty seemed unparalleled. These depictions, while often exaggerated, cemented Attila's image as a figure larger than life, a man whose reputation alone could command submission and tribute. This image of Attila as an unstoppable force of nature persisted throughout medieval and early modern European literature, shaping his enduring reputation as a symbol of terror. The mythic dimension of Attila's legacy also extends to his moniker, the Scourge of God. Latin, Flagellum Dei. This title, bestowed by Christian chroniclers, reflected the perception that Attila's invasions were divine punishment for humanity's sins. The label framed Attila not merely as a conqueror, but as an instrument of cosmic justice, giving his actions a moral and theological weight that transcended the immediate political context. This perspective had profound cultural implications, influencing how subsequent generations interpreted the relationship between divine providence, morality, and historical events. Attila's campaigns were thus remembered not only as military exploits, but also as emblematic lessons about power, punishment, and human vulnerability. In addition to European perceptions, Attila's legacy influenced the development of historical scholarship and military thought. His mastery of cavalry warfare, strategic mobility, and psychological intimidation became subjects of study for later military leaders and historians. Unlike many conquerors whose influence faded with time, Attila's approach to warfare, particularly his integration of speed, surprise, and terror, remains a reference point in discussions of asymmetric and nomadic warfare. Modern military historians often cite the Hunnic army under Attila as an early example of a force capable of defeating larger, more sedentary armies through innovation, discipline, and strategic cunning. In this sense, Attila's legacy extends beyond the annals of history into the ongoing study of military strategy and leadership. Attila also left a cultural and literary legacy that endured for centuries. In medieval Europe, he was often depicted in chronicles, epic poems, and folklore as the quintessential barbarian invader. Later writers, including Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy, placed Attila in the context of divine judgment, further solidifying his reputation as a figure of fear and moral consequence. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, historians and dramatists continued to portray Attila as both a historical reality and a symbol of chaos and destruction. These literary and cultural representations contributed to the lasting mystique of Attila, transforming him from a historical conqueror into a symbol that resonated with universal themes of power, fear, and mortality. Interestingly, the legacy of Attila is not entirely negative. Among the Huns themselves, he was revered as a unifying figure, a leader who consolidated disparate tribes into a cohesive confederation, capable of achieving extraordinary military and political feats. Attila's ability to maintain loyalty among the often fractious Hunnic tribes demonstrates his exceptional leadership and charisma. In this sense, Attila's legacy also includes the demonstration of what strong, centralized leadership could accomplish among nomadic societies, a model that would inspire or serve as a cautionary tale for subsequent steppe empires, such as the Mongols under Genghis Khan centuries later. Attila's death in 453 CE marked the end of the Huns' immediate dominance, but it did not diminish his reputation. Accounts of his death, whether from a sudden hemorrhage on his wedding night or other causes, only added to the aura of mystique surrounding him. The Hunnic confederation soon fragmented without his unifying presence, but the fear and legends associated with his name persisted. Roman, Byzantine, and later European accounts continue to treat him as a benchmark of barbarian power, an archetype of the nomadic conqueror whose mobility, ferocity, and cunning could challenge even the most established civilizations. The legacy of Attila also extends into modern popular culture, where he continues to be depicted in films, novels, and television series as the quintessential conqueror. His image as a fearsome warrior and strategic genius endures, reflecting the combination of historical fact and myth that has shaped perceptions of him for centuries. This enduring presence in cultural memory underscores the profound psychological and symbolic impact he had on Europe and beyond. Attila is more than a historical figure. He is a symbol of unstoppable force, a reminder of the vulnerabilities of even the greatest empires, and a lens through which societies have explored themes of power, fear, and leadership. Furthermore, Attila's legacy is also studied in the context of geopolitics and the movement of peoples. His campaigns set in motion migrations, alliances, and conflicts that reshaped the map of Europe in ways that had long-lasting consequences. The displacement of tribes, the weakening of the Roman Empire, and the subsequent establishment of successor kingdoms created a new European landscape in which power was far more fluid and contested. Attila's actions, therefore, were pivotal not just in immediate military terms, but in shaping the trajectory of European history. In conclusion, the legacy of Attila the Hun is multifaceted, encompassing military innovation, political disruption, psychological terror, and enduring myth. He left a tangible imprint on the Roman Empire, reshaping political boundaries and accelerating the decline of Western Rome. At the same time, his persona became legendary, influencing literature, folklore, and cultural memory for centuries. Attila's life and deeds continue to captivate historians, strategists, and the general public alike, demonstrating how the combination of skill, ambition, and fear can leave a mark on history that transcends time. From his battlefield tactics to the enduring legends of the Scourge of God, Attila's legacy is a testament to the power of leadership, the effectiveness of innovation in warfare, and the enduring fascination with figures who challenge empires and rewrite history. Ultimately, Attila the Hun is remembered not merely as a conqueror, but as a symbol, a reminder of the fragility of civilizations, the potency of human ambition, and the enduring impact of fear, strategy, and leadership. His legacy, etched in both historical records and cultural imagination, ensures that the name Attila remains synonymous with power, terror, and the profound influence of one extraordinary leader on the course of history.